Jacobs here.
Okay, welcome everyone this evening to our joint City Council Planning Commission meeting. Change of plans from directive from our city manager that I guess they've asked me to conduct because this is the City Council invites the Planning Commission, I guess, is the way it's been explained, that we called it.
I second that.
Just, it is different, so I don't want to go on too much about this, but I just want to express my appreciation to the Planning Commission. Being where you guys were, I miss you guys, first of all, but thank you for what you do. I mean, you're very much an underappreciated, kind of the unsung hero of the community. I appreciate what you guys do, the time you spend, with the packets and doing what you do, and you absolutely serve a valuable role in this community. So thank you for what you do, and thank you for being here with us tonight. We're going to jump right in and go to item 1.1 and look for approval of the minutes from June 30th, 2021.
Motion to approve minutes.
Motion by Chris.
Yep.
I'll second.
Second by Heather. All in favor? Aye. Thank you. Move on to item 2.1. Do some Open and Public Meetings Act training by Chase.
This feels awkward up here, but I'm just going to lean into it. This is everyone's favorite meeting, so I'll make it brief and thorough. As you all know, we're required by state law to do training every year on the Open and Public Meetings Act. I was just talking to another city attorney, and he showed a movie, and I feel a little sorry that I didn't provide that option to you guys. I think next year we'll watch a movie on this. So if you'll just stick with me for a couple minutes, we'll get a movie next time. Yeah, probably a Dilbert comic in there. I'm not sure how we'll format it next year. So really all we're going to talk about tonight, and really all the training requires, is that we just review the Open and Public Meetings Act and how it applies to you as public bodies. Here's some of the things that we'll talk about tonight. Really the purpose of this is to make sure that you as public bodies are doing all of your business out in the open, that it's transparent and done for the public's review. For that reason, there's a lot of restrictions about what you can talk about outside of public meetings, restrictions about how you can meet as quorums, your communications outside of meetings, and those are all some of the things that we'll talk about. A few important definitions that I think we should talk about are electronic meetings. This has taken a new format over the last few years. Previously, prior to COVID, we didn't have a lot of electronic meetings. Someone might join by telephone, and that was the extent of it. Today, it's very much the norm to have people on Zoom, have people, one person in an anchor location and everyone else kind of joining electronically. So in that sense, an electronic meeting is just that. You have people joining through electronic means, whether that's by phone, by Zoom, you can see their face or you can hear their voice, and you're able to determine that it is that person who's participating in the meeting. Another definition is just that, a meeting, and that is the convening of a public body with a quorum present. So as you look at those two definitions, what is a public body? Well, you guys are a public body. Any body with decision-making authority for the city is considered a public body. City Council, Planning Commission, our CDRA board, our HCC board, our fire board, those types of entities are public bodies. Anytime any of those bodies meet together in a quorum, where that's a simple majority, a meeting has occurred. The general rule under the Open and Public Meetings Act is that every meeting is open to the public. And that's kind of simplistic, but at the same time, I think it's also important to highlight the purposes again. If what your goal is and what the purpose of the Open and Public Meetings Act is to conduct all of your business out in the open, that means every time that you meet as a public body with a quorum, your meeting is open to the public. There are some exceptions, which you guys are well aware of, and I'll highlight those in just a second, but those are the statutory provisions that provide for you to go into a closed meeting. The requirements to hold a meeting are that you must notice it up at least 24 hours in advance. Both of your bodies, the City Council and the Planning Commission, do that 6 days and even 7 days in some cases. So we provide more notice than is necessarily required. This died on me. We're back. All right, here we are. Again, so every meeting must be preceded by 24 hours notice. That notice has to include what the agenda is going to look like, what items you're going to talk about. There has to be some specificity to what those items are going to be. You don't have to highlight them in exact detail, but at least some notice to the public about what's going to be discussed. You've also got to include the date of the meeting, the time of the meeting, and the place of the meeting. We're fortunate to have Jackie and her team who do a great job of covering all that for us. So they're always making sure that we're compliant with those requirements. Again, I already highlighted the agenda has to be specific enough so that people know what's being discussed, right? They know when to show up to hear a topic about a land use issue, an ordinance change, an interlocal agreement with the county. And again, Jackie and her team do a good job of vetting that out to make sure that people are aware of what's being talked about. A couple of restrictions about meetings and agendas. There are regular meetings, there are special meetings, and then there are emergency meetings. With an emergency meeting and special meeting, you're not supposed to take any action, right? You can meet to discuss items that come up on an urgent or an emergent basis, but we're not taking action generally in those meetings. One other item that comes up often is if someone brings up something in public comment, right? You're prohibited from taking action on those, but you can discuss those items. So you can say, hey, after our public comment, we're going to talk about this item, maybe give staff some direction, talk to the resident a little bit who made the public comment, but you're prohibited from taking any action on the item brought up during the public comment. As to the minutes and the recordings, a lot of people confuse these two and think that if I want to know what happened in a meeting, I can just go back and watch it. And while that's true, that gives you the context of what was discussed and maybe some of the additional, emotion that was behind those meetings. The official record of a meeting is the minutes. And so that's why your approval tonight, that process that you engaged in before we got to this item of approving minutes, is so important, because that becomes the official record of your meetings. It's important to me as an attorney because I can go back to those minutes and say, what was the official decision? What was the discussion that was had? And does it really represent, some of the context and some of the discussion on those items that were decided? So just a word of I guess, legal advice is to really give some attention to those, go through those, with some level of, discipline, and actually pay attention to what it is that you're approving, especially if you're the one making a comment, right? Because there might be an instance where Jackie or Ashley or Wendy are taking minutes and maybe don't reflect what it is exactly that you wanted to say as a planning commissioner or city council member. So you have an opportunity to go back and correct that. And so again, it's important that we understand what role the minutes play in the official documentation that those are with regard to prior meetings. My favorite part, closed meetings. So one thing I like to point out, and I've made this a point a number of times with the city council, is that we don't have to have closed meetings. Items that are listed out here allow you to go into a closed meeting if you're discussing those. It's not required that you do so. That said, there's a lot of benefit into going into closed meetings to discuss some of these items, but the general rule, if you recall from an earlier slide, is that all meetings are open to the public. If you have a few items that you need to discuss in closed, here they are, and you can do it. So that's something that we can discuss as those individual items come up. A few items for which you can go into a closed meeting. I'll just highlight the first three. Those are really the most important. The discussion of character, professional competence, or physical or mental health of an individual. If you go into a closed meeting for this, there is no recording of it. For obvious reasons, I think that we don't want to have that recording, but there will be an affidavit that the presiding authority or body at that meeting does sign stating this is what we talked about. We talked about this particular bullet point. You can also go into a closed meeting to discuss collective bargaining. We don't do a lot of that, fortunately, or a strategy session to discuss litigation. Two important distinctions here on this slide. We also go into closed meeting a lot in this city to discuss property. And we kind of say that generally a lot, but really there are two distinctions there. The first one is that you can go into closed to discuss the purchase, exchange, or lease of property. And then the second property scenario would be to discuss the sale of property. And the reason I call those two out is because with the second item, with the sale of property, you can go into closed to discuss it, but you can't take any action until you have a public disclosure of what it is you're doing. So, for example, you might go into closed session to talk about selling some property that the city owns, and you might do that to negotiate your best price with the potential buyer. However, you cannot consummate that transaction until you come out of closed, and in that same meeting or in a later meeting, disclose that, yes, we are going to sell it, and this is what we're going to sell it for. A few distinctions with the general meeting is you do have to have a quorum, but you have to have 2/3 of the members vote to go into a quorum. So with the city council, that requires 4 of 5 or 3 of 4, right? You could do, I guess, 2 of 3. You're asking the lawyer to do some on-the-spot math, and I don't know how I'm doing, but yeah, there we go. Yeah, you could have 3, it gives you a quorum, and 2 of those members could vote to go into closed. There we go, we worked through it. So that's different than most actions by the city council, which simply require a simple majority. Again, you would have to publicly announce the reasons why you're going to close. Again, Jackie does a great job of that, of putting the language on the agenda that you just simply read saying, here's why we're going into closed. And then again, we also do a good job of making sure that we're not approving ordinances, discussing contracts. It's mostly an opportunity to discuss strategy, maybe give some direction to staff, and then come out of that meeting with direction that you take officially on the record through either a resolution or ordinance. I stated earlier, there's not a record kept of closed meetings when you're discussing character of an individual, but we do keep a recording of those meetings for any of those other items. There's some benefit to that, and in my practice I've seen opportunities and had opportunities to go back and review those, and it's saved us from litigation, and kind of clarified the record for people who may not have been in those meetings. So there's some benefit to recording those meetings. That said, it's always good and it's advisable to limit your discussion in closed meetings. And fortunately, our city council does a good job of that, saying, hey, I think we're getting a little off track here, and bring it back in. Because those meetings really are just to discuss those limited items and discuss only the scope needed to protect the discussion of those items. Electronic meetings. So again, this has kind of taken a new form over the last few years. These are permitted. A few changes that are interesting that many of you have experienced already is that under current state law, you could have an electronic meeting where no one's present. In order to do that, however, you would be required, I'm going to skip to this next slide, you would be required to make a finding on the record that all of us meeting in one room poses some risk. Obviously, that was done in light of COVID, and the legislature determined, hey, we can make it such that a public body can still meet together electronically and accomplish what they need to. Again, you've got to make that finding, and you have to renew that finding every 30 days. I don't anticipate we're ever going to get down that road again. But if we did, we would have a means of accomplishing that. So. Just a few more things I wanted to point out with the Open and Public Meetings Act is there's some debate and some discussion in legal circles about cell phones and cell phone use during a public meeting. It's really an unsettled and unresolved area of law. My warning would be that if you're in a public meeting with a quorum and you're using your phone to discuss with other council members who are present or other members of the public body who are there, those meetings are likely subject to grandma and could potentially go into the record, right? It's no different than if you were having a discussion behind the scenes in a public meeting. Again, it's unresolved, so I can't tell you one way or another how that would come out if that were to be challenged. So use your own judgment there, best judgment. The other item is, again, with cell phones, with other forms of communication, with your colleagues on the public body, those should be open and transparent under the Open and Public Meetings Act. They're also subject to grandma, right? And so those may provide additional context and could be used potentially to help sway a litigant's position as to what the city council decided or didn't decide. So my best advice to you is, if you're discussing an item with another member of the city council, maybe pick up the phone and give them a call, right? And just discuss that. There's nothing that prohibits you from talking about items one-on-one with each other outside of the city council meeting. It's when you're convening a meeting and having three of you together that there's a potential issue. And then lastly, just a couple of other things. We are required to provide reasonable accommodation. So if someone comes to us with a request to, most commonly you'll see hearing devices, right? If someone comes and says, hey, I'm having a hard time hearing, I need some accommodation, we're required to stop our meeting and provide that accommodation or find a way for them to overcome whatever it is that's limiting their participation in the meeting. With regard to disruptive behavior, you can always have someone removed. We're fortunate that we have pretty good meeting participants. Most people that come, even for heated items, generally are well behaved, and we haven't had too much of an issue. I guess I missed the chicken debates. Was that a hot one? Sherry's laughing at that one, but for me in Ephraim, when I was there, it was mosquito abatement. Whole town came out to talk about mosquito abatement, so maybe we'll avoid that one as well. If there is an issue with regard to the agenda, with regard to the notice, whether there was a quorum present, any decisions made in that meeting that gets challenged could potentially be voided. And so that's why it's so important that you as a city council and planning commission make sure that you're following through with these items. And I think that's one of the reasons why we do this training. It's just so, even though these things might seem small and they feel a little bit like minutia, we're really making sure that we're doing them so that there aren't issues to decisions that you're making, important decisions that you're making. Yeah.
So for the reasonable accommodations, what do we currently have for if someone was hearing impaired?
I think we have a headset upstairs. Yeah, we have a headset upstairs that I think I've seen a few people actually use those in the time I've been here. So that would be one. And again, this is reasonable accommodation, right? If someone's deaf and just can't hear, maybe we can send you a closed caption video. I don't know, right? It's not something that comes up too often for public bodies, but it is something to be aware of. And my advice is always stop your meeting until you can sort that out, right? Don't just keep plowing through and let them catch up. So, and then the last bullet item, challenging a closed meeting. So again, those meetings are recorded except for when you discuss the character of an individual. And if there's a challenge to what was discussed, that challenge is reviewed in camera by a judge, meaning the judge doesn't just release it. Judge will go back and listen to it and make a determination about whether the public body violated the closed meeting provisions of the act. If they do, only those portions that should not have been discussed in a closed meeting will get released. And they essentially become public. So we make notes or minutes of those meetings, and those minutes get adopted and they become part of the public record. So again, another reason why it's important to limit your discussion to only that which is necessary to accomplish the purpose of the closed meeting. Any questions? Sorry it wasn't a movie, but next time, I promise. So, yeah, thanks you guys.
Appreciate it, Chase. Thank you. We'll move to item 2.2, discussion on the Harriman Preserve project. Turn the time to Blake.
So as those are going around, I'll just give a quick introduction. The Harriman Preserve is the property that has formerly been referred to as Laguna and Malibu. And so we're just going to kind of go through a quick little presentation tonight on the current land use, what that land's designated for underneath our current zoning, current general plan, some restrictions with the Hillside Overlay, and then what's being requested. And then the goal is the staff is looking for feedback from this group to help us get from this negotiating and discussion process to the decision-making process, to get it to council for the decision. So the location of this, if you're not familiar with it, it's on the south end of the city, kind of on the east side. So the property actually extends from Juniper Crest all the way to Camp Williams border. It's approximately 970 acres. And so here it is. And I've got it color-coded here. The blue piece on the north, we're going to refer to as Laguna Point as we go through this. The green piece, that's the larger portion that's on the west side, on the south, is just Laguna. And then the piece that looks like a big block letter C is Malibu. And so Laguna Point is about 80 acres. Laguna is 546-ish acres, and Malibu is about 269 acres. And so I've got a few maps here, and then the maps that I've handed out show the current general plan and zoning for each one of these pieces. And the first 2 pages are the overall, but as you look at the ones that are broken out for the Laguna Point, Laguna, and Malibu, it's probably a little bit more clear. And so I'll kind of go through the layers of those are all laid together, so they're a little bit hard to see, but what I'm showing on the map here will be a little bit more clear. So the first slide is the zoning. So you can see Laguna Point on the north has about 48 acres, zoned R115. That was zoned from A1 to R115 in 2015, and at that time the Planning Commission put a zoning condition on it of 1.7 units the acre. That'll become important here in a second when we talk about the general plan. Then there's about 27.5 acres of FR 2.5, and then 4 acres of A1. And then Laguna has, all of it is zoned FR 2.5, all 546 acres, and Malibu's the same. All 269 acres is FR 2.5. And for reference, FR 2.5 is 0.4 units the acre or 2.5 acre lots. Then we go to the general plan. And the general plan has the agricultural single-family residential. There's about 37 acres of that in the Laguna Point project. And so the 1.7 units the acre was actually less than what was general plan there. The general plan is 2.6 to 4.5 units the acre. So you see there's pretty big discrepancy on what was approved and what the zoning condition held and what's actually general plan for that property. And then there's an open space component of that in the general plan for Laguna Point that's 43 acres. And open space has 0 units the acre tied to it. So it's no residential use on that. For Laguna, you have 94 acres of residential recreational, which lends itself to the FR 2.5 zone. It's also maximum density of 0.4 units per acre. And then 448 acres of open space. And then Malibu has 37 acres of residential recreational, 232 acres of open space. So take those 2 things together, and so the zoning is what allows them to develop right now. The general plan's guiding, so if anything changes, it would have to go through as rezone if like that north piece were to be requested for more density. Or they can go through the process they're going through right now, which is the large master plan community zone, which we'll get to that in a second. But put those together and you got the Hillside Overlay. This was adopted by the city, I think in 2012, 2010, somewhere in there. And the purpose of the Hillside Overlay Zone, I'll read this straight from the code because it was kind of long, but it's to protect the natural and scenic environment of the southern part of the city. Its intent is to assist the development of steep slopes in the South Mountain area to become desirable and a safe place to live and recreate. And the city intends to preserve as much of the existing natural beauty as is feasible and still allow for compatible development. The natural resources should be taken advantage of without significantly detracting from the enjoyment of the hillside area. So with that purpose, this overlay does restrict the development of this property quite a bit. You can see on the maps that I provided, there's areas that we've general planned for development that are actually inside of the hillside overlay. The developer in the packet materials that were sent out actually has some slope analysis that they've looked at. When the hillside overlay was created, from what I can gather, that they used GIS and they figured out all the areas that were above 30% slope, and then they picked a north line and went along it, and everything south of that, except for a strip through the middle of Laguna and Malibu, was designated as hillside overlay. And so there's areas inside of that that are actually less than 30%. There's areas that are much higher than 30%, and it's just kind of a blanket cover over the area. And so in the tables on the exhibits I handed out, you can kind of see I took the zoned area, so if there was like 40 acres of FR 2.5, I carved out what was outside of that hillside overlay and gave you the developable. And so underneath that row in the table that says developable, that's area in either general plan or zoning that's outside of the 30% overlay. So if there are any questions at that point, that's the basic background of where we're at with what's currently allowed with the current zoning, current general plan, and the hillside overlay. Okay. I'll keep moving. We'll get into what the proposed land use is. So here's a plan of what has been included in the application for the large community master plan, or large master plan community zone. And so the first test of that was, do they meet the requirements? And they have to be greater than 200 acres. So check, that was done. And they have to have an MDA to come in underneath that zone. So they've drafted a draft MDA, and we've read through it. And we've actually taken this discussion to City Council and put together MDA working groups. And that's been the process that we followed that was set forth with Olympia. And so we've got an infrastructure working group and a planning working group that have been meeting weekly for the last several weeks, going over some of these issues that I'll bring up and we'll discuss tonight. And many of all these plans have basically come out of those discussions, and the components of these plans are answering the questions that have come out of those meetings. So as you can see in the plan, it generally follows 30% overlay on the south piece, but there are pieces in the development that are being proposed in the 30% overlay. So as we go through this, and some of the feedback the staff's looking for and the developer's looking for is, do we want to allow development inside that hillside overlay? To what extent, if we do? And so I'll be thinking about that as we keep talking. One of the largest components of this project is the open space and the trails. The code for the large community master plan zone, or large master, I keep putting community first, large master plan community. It requires a general location be provided for the public parks, private parks, trails, and open space. So this plan answers that question in that zone, in that code. And this shows some general ideas of where the trails will go, where some of the park amenities will be, and you can see a lot of it. Everything outside of those development pods is going to be designated as native open space, unimproved open space. Kind of satisfies the spirit of the hillside overlay with that. So this slide shows the proposed road cross sections as you come through the Rosecrest property and through the Staker property. I've also included a few other cross sections that we looked at yesterday. I should have had them in this presentation. I just didn't see them in the packet that they'd sent over to me. But the cross sections in your handout show some of the areas inside the development, the main roads, what the cross section will look like. There's no proposal for curb and gutter, but they'll have berms and swells. Kind of lends itself to the urban or the rural environment. And then you can see they've shown where the trail will go if it's higher than the road or lower than the road, and where there's a berm. So that kind of lends itself you can kind of see how the trail will kind of meander along the side of the road, and the berm will give a little bit opportunity of privacy for the lots that are adjacent to that. Another thing that we discussed with this yesterday was the swells will provide an opportunity to answer the low-impact stormwater requirements that the state has, so they'll be able to incorporate some of those BMPs, we call them, into that cross-section. Moving along, there are sections of the road, once you get up the hill so far, that the road will have to go above 8% to make it accessible. And so the school district has talked to us about bus routes, and the bus routes aren't to exceed 8%. So what the developer's proposing is when you get to the point where it has to exceed 8%, they'll put a bus stop in so the buses can turn around at that location. The parents that live up the hill can bring their kids and drop them off there, and then this will actually operate as a trailhead as well. So you can have a trailhead and a bus stop down where the road grades will have to change. We talked about trails being a large part of this community. There are 3 trail cross sections shown. There's an 8-foot path at the top shown as a multi-use path. I think this one was a paved one. This one runs. This is the one that would run along the road that you're seeing in the cross sections that you have there. Be along we call it the east access and the north access road. So it'd run them parallel to those. There's also a trail in the middle that's a 5-foot unpaved trail that would be a connector trail to connect the pods together. There's some areas you saw in the road cross sections and that we'd already shown that some of those don't have sidewalks, so they would be incorporating this narrower 5-foot trail to tie the communities or the pods together. And then the bottom trail is the mountain biking trail, and that's pretty standard that you'd see for a single track type trail as you're going through the native unimproved open space areas. Have a few sample lot layouts to share that the developers prepared. This is a typical cul-de-sac, and the key thing we want to point out here is the light green would be areas that are above 30% slope. So somehow on the plat this would be shown as unbuildable, and then the dark green would be the area where they would build. So you'd have larger lots, and portions of those lots would be in the steeper slopes. There's another sample lot layout where this would be lots accessed by a lane. Some of the lots, again, are extending into that 30% slope, as you can see, with the lighter green and darker green. And one of the key benefits with this layout is it minimizes the number of driveways on the main road and allows for a lane, a little bit quieter access into someone's home. The last sample lot layout, this is actually the Laguna Point layout, the proposed layout. I believe this one shows 105 lots. And you can see they've done this shows a slope analysis. The red is the steeper areas, and then the lighter green is the 30% and less, the developable areas. And you can see that this kind of blends with what Greystone has done next door, and then what's proposed in the property to the west. The property to the east, the property to the east was shown in a amendment that Rosecrest was going to do to their MDA in early 2020, and then that never happened. So that property still has not been approved to be in the Rosecrest MDA, but this is what the plan was at that time. And then keeping in mind that this was zoned the R115 with the 1.7 units per acre zoning condition, this this would exceed that, but this adheres to the general plan. So it would require a rezone or be included in the MDA with the large master plan community. This property currently does have access to Juniper Crest and has utilities stubbed in and needs a water tank before any more homes could be built up there, but that's basically the only thing holding this property back from moving forward with the development. This pedestrian access plan shows the trails. So you can see the purple line that follows the main road. You can see this is what we're calling the east access road and the north access road. The purple line shows where those 8-foot paths would go. And then they're a little bit hard to see on this, but these light gray lines, I think they're gray or light blue. They're the paths, the unpaved 5-foot paths that would connect the pods together as you go through. And then you have trails that go out through the open space. And so to just kind of end here, some of the other discussion items that we've had in our MDA committee meetings. Yesterday, we talked about a DRC concept. So the developer would have their own DRC as a proposal. And then if we kind of discussed this when the Olympia project came through, that if we put a staff member on that DRC, and the design guidelines were set up such that when they submitted plans and they met all the check boxes of the design guidelines and requirements, that project potentially would not come to planning commission. It would just go through a staff approval. So that's one option to go through. Or they would have a typical setup like we've had with our South Hills and those projects, where there's a DRC and they review the plans internally and there's no city staff on that. And then they would send that through a typical application process with the city, where it would go and then come to the planning commission. And if it met everything, it would have to get approved at that point. So there's been a discussion about having these options for one type of DRC setup or another. And I don't think we've ever landed anywhere on that yet, but it's open for discussion, and I'd like to hear about your input on that tonight. The Hillside Overlay, as I discussed, how much do we want to go into that? The land is less than 30% slope, so it's developable, but we currently have an overlay over that to limit or restrict development. One other item we've talked about is the ongoing cost of service and maintenance. We had a pretty robust discussion on that yesterday with our working group. We talked about police service, we talked about fire service, talked about snow plowing. And so we actually have some phone calls into Draper to ask about Suncrest and how much they spend on certain components of that. Suncrest is pretty similar to this development in its proximity to the main city and slopes and hillside. And the last item that I had listed here is just the compatibility of what type of compatible uses do we have, or do we want to have next to the military base. We've been doing a great job at preserving land along the base, and then this area, according to the general plan, is contemplated being developed up pretty close to the base. And so there's been some discussion, there have been some meetings that council has had with the camp, some folks at the camp, about what type of uses they would like to have next to them. There's been some discussions about having a waiver, so if people were to buy in that area and they were right up against the base, in their closing documents there'd be a waiver that says there's going to be noise, there's going to be impacts, and you're not going to be able to complain about them if you move here. So with that, the developer is present tonight. We have John Lindsley and Reed Dixon. They're here to answer any questions you have. And just a reminder, we're looking for some feedback on some items that you want to see answered or buttoned up, so that we can get this to the process of coming to Planning Commission for a recommendation to council. So, okay.
Thank you, Blake. I think we'll just go through this list. If your microphones there are green, you're being heard. Let's just open this and let's just go line by line, I guess. Blake, kind of just start at the top there.
Okay.
And just, I think we're looking for, a couple of us on the council are in some of these working groups, so I think we're looking for feedback from commission specifically on this stuff, and even council if you're not. You know, those of you that might not be in one of these working groups to give us some feedback on this stuff.
I personally don't like the development review committee option. I think it should go to planning commission like a traditional application, especially since it's right next to the Camp Williams property, and it would be wise to notify the federal government of what's being developed next to them. So I think we need to have as much public open meetings as possible. So,
Where is the buffer zone we have? Is that line?
So that's what's being proposed here, is a 100-foot buffer along the south. But this is all ACUP property that's been purchased so far.
I'm just trying to remember, I thought there was grant money that came through for us to provide a buffer between the camp and,
There's ACUP funding, but you have to have a willing seller, and so you have to negotiate.
so this part has no buffer compared to other areas?
No existing buffer.
No existing buffer at all? Okay.
And one of the things we talked about yesterday that I think is important to bring up is that that's really something, Camp Williams is a partner, right? They're a partner with the city, as are other development partners we have. And we as a city, Camp Williams interests, but there are also property owner interests at play. And one of the things we discussed with the applicant, the developer here, is that this is a discussion that you need to also have with the community, right? It's not up to us to decide what they do with their property, right? As long as they're coming in within whatever zoning rights they have and or a development agreement that we negotiate with them, that's up to them and Camp Williams to also discuss how they work out that potential buffer. Because to Blake's point, we only get grant funds if we have a willing seller. So
Sure.
we can't force them to give us that property.
I just wanted to see if there was a buffer already between this or not, and there's not. That's what I was
This is,
trying to figure out.
this is owned by the National Guard over here,
So that's
and this
the
is
buffer
ACUP,
there.
so yeah, there's this gap here.
And you, on this first page, you can kind of see the road right here that's on the camp?
So that's the camp's road?
Yeah.
Okay.
And it crosses.
Yeah. It encroaches right there.
Any other comments on the DRC process from the commission?
No, I agree with Adam. We need to keep it public. That's part of the reason we didn't want that in the Olympia development. Is lack of transparency we felt, so.
That's how we usually get negative impacts from the community, is when they don't know what's going on.
Yep.
And this allows transparency of what's actually happening.
This is gonna draw a lot of attention. I mean,
Yeah.
Suncrest drew a lot of attention back in those days, so.
Yeah, I think it'd be easier if you had lots laid out and showed that, but it's so far out there and it's a lot of property that I don't think you can get to that point. So Mountain Ridge would be one example where you could have possibly done that because you had actual layouts in their plan, so, okay.
Is there anything here that isn't single-family homes?
So this area right here is being proposed as attached housing and everything else is single family. I think, is there a last page showing
There
the
is,
plan?
yeah.
That shows the half acre.
Shows the clusters.
Can we do anything else like?
Can you repeat that? I don't think that was loud enough, sir.
That was a request for if there would be any C-stores or churches in this area, and the developer is amenable to those items.
And I don't know as well, but speaking of churches, everything else, at least with Suncrest, didn't they have to put a fire station up there because of access?
We talked about this yesterday, and yeah, I think they did put a fire station up top.
I think they had to.
I think it was call times or response times. They had to
Yeah,
do it.
I think it's the response times and things like that.
You're jumping down to the second group of bullets.
Sorry,
We're not there yet.
sorry. Sorry. I'm ready for the next one.
Would it be the same even with our police? Our response times would be pretty lagging there also.
Yeah, we talked about that yesterday,
Sorry.
but you're good.
Sorry.
Not only response times for the police, but callback response times for the rest of the city. So
Yeah.
it'd be a special district or special service area is what we're looking at possibly.
If you read the Hillside Overlay code, the adopted code of the city, it contemplates those specific items. It talks about police, talks about fire, maintenance.
Let me go back to the DRC a minute.
Yep, please.
On the DRC side, how many of the single-family homes, I could see a lot of these being custom homes, it's not gonna be stamping out, A through C. Would every single one of those have to come to us if it didn't have a DRC?
I think it would be the pod. So the pod would come to you, and then once the lot layout and everything's approved, then each one of those, the houses would just come into the.
We would have to review them single for the house.
So we wouldn't have to review every single little house that we can buy.
You'd follow the subdivision process.
In the packet, it kind of indicated more about the development review committee would even be like, what if they wanted a garage, something, even the doghouse, those kind of things, right?
Yeah, so in the design guidelines, they'd have to follow those items. Yeah. A lot of architectural discussion in that, the architectural standards, the accessory structures and things like that.
But that's per pod.
So it would be the overall development, and then I think, depending on how it ends up in the MDA, it could be by pod or by Laguna or Malibu or Laguna Point, Colorado.
Yeah. Okay. Might have a cool.
Want to move to,
Hey, let's go to the next one. How to minimize impacts to Nato landscape.
this is the Hillside Overlay Zone discussion.
I think we need to keep it.
I think that's why we made a hillside overlay zone, is to protect the native landscape in that area and also the slopes and that have impacts on things.
So a point of clarification, though, that, as you were mentioning, that was done by a GIS layer, it wasn't done by actual survey or anything like that, there were some assumptions, so would that be adjusted then to meet the actual 30%?
So we have
you know,
done that for some developments in
Right.
the past. Fort Harriman Cove, for example, they had a line going through a lot. We pushed it back because they went, had survey data and showed that we were pretty rudimentary in our analysis, and they made it a little more fun. They go out and do an actual survey.
So it would, the overlay zone would have to be updated then based on the,
Yeah, and so
Based on
I
actual-
think that would be
actuals,
done
not
in the
assumed.
MDA as part of this discussion, they would identify a new hillside overlay line.
Great.
That's what I would see happening here if the council and planning commission were amended to expand.
My only concern with that is, I mean, you can kind of already see it with
No,
what
you're
the
fine.
gravel
If you
pit
were to-
has already done, is they've basically obliterated the old overlay zone.
That's,
And now we're putting our highest density there, and I think that was why the intention of the
Yeah.
overlay zone in the first place.
Yeah.
And I would hate to go back on that personally.
That is one great example, is this pond right here. If you look on your maps, that's part of the hillside overlay, but it's part of the staker grading as well.
Yeah.
So my contours from 5 years ago show that as a giant hill, and my contours from last year show it as a flat land.
So obviously that needs
And
to be
that's
clarified.
my concern that we're
Absolutely.
gonna keep getting as we progress. If I go in there and I claim it as a mineral mining operation, and then now in another 2 years, it becomes a nice flat.
Well, I think that's why the initial overlay zone was done, right? Just so that would
That's
not
why I
happen.
believe it spans so many,
Yeah.
so far as,
Yeah.
as a off the base stuff logical. When was the overlay put in?
The last ordinance update was 2017, but it was in, I think, before 2013. So I think it was like 2012,
It's been in for a while.
2011, somewhere in there.
Yeah.
Well, I know that there's maybe some clarification on what the actual intent of the overlay zone is and the actual functionality of it in this area. As the developer has some small fingerlings or a small hill inside certain pod areas that may be over 30%, but really if they grade out that small area, or if they grade out a small percentage of it where they don't interface the rest of the native landscape, that they're able to have a more buildable space, or the pod is more contiguous. Would that be?
Yeah, there was a heat map, right?
There's a heat
The
map,
heat
yeah.
map that kind of showed that, right?
Yeah, and so, and it's very,
They don't have a heat map for this, they only have a heat map for the big piece, and if you look at the heat map, there's like
I
7
do
lots
have-
that they've graded over to make it work.
yeah.
Yeah.
I do have one for the whole project.
Yeah.
But it's not in this presentation.
And that's maybe that the letter of the law, or the intent of the law, the clarification there that we might have to look at, but.
And according to our general plan, there are some areas that are planned for development that are inside of that hillside overlay. So kind of not super consistent on everything in our mapping.
Well, and I apologize, but can you remind me of the exact definition of the hillside overlay zone?
So do you want the whole purpose, or?
Sure.
It was what I read earlier, but, so the main key things are to protect the natural and scenic environment of the southern part of the city, and to assist the development of steep slopes so that they're desirable and safe to live in and recreate, and to preserve as much of the existing natural beauty as is feasible and still allow for compatible development.
So it had nothing to do with 30%.
Yeah, so to me, it's meeting that requirement with where it's at as an overlay zone. And yeah, there's gonna be places you can develop and places you can't develop, but it says to preserve scenic area as well as, not just saying just slopes, to limit that. I think it's to protect both sides a little bit, is how it was written.
It's in other areas than just this, right? It goes up around the cove, and I think we'd be opening up to a lot of areas that we could say, yes, you can go develop if we're gonna keep editing it, so.
Yeah,
I'm comfortable with what we approved it back then. I get maybe like on the fringe area, you know, you adjust the line a little bit to capture some of the area, you know, along this area. Or, you know, down the yellow because you know, they were capturing a contour that was, you know, a total different version, but I don't see why we would open up areas within the bigger map.
No, agreed, yeah.
I'm gonna say maybe the opposite, because I know some of these spaces, I've jogged through them, and jogged through them fairly regularly, and they're really not that steep. And I think it'd be some, you know, some really great areas that are fairly flat. There's some nice places we could do something.
but I guess my question or thought there is, isn't that what we want in the city in some places? Some open areas that have some flat and have some slopes? We're not, it didn't say we're trying to just preserve these steep areas. That's not what it's saying, at least with what I got as the purpose of this overlay zone. It's to actually preserve both and to actually still have an area that's protected a little bit. And so that's my question is, if the purpose of it is to protect the scenic area and other things like that, the flat areas in some areas are as important as the sloped areas. It's more or less to choose an area that is protected for the city. And if that's, in essence, what the purpose was, and I think it is, then I think the overlay zone is something that needs to be preserved.
Totally agree.
So that north access road is going right through that overlay zone, right? And that little, right, fingerling coming off the north.
There's some
northeast there.
provisions in the Hillside Overlay to allow for roads to go through, but you have.
Is that what it is? Is it roads though, or are they looking at putting homes there too? I
They
don't,
were looking at homes as well.
Yeah.
And it does say that the uses can be allowed in there, but you can't disturb it to create development. So it's kind of like, your use is allowed, but you gotta find a flat area, you can still develop it, but you can't touch anything else. So it really limits what can happen in there.
So the pink area along the blue line in this, is that?
that's in the Hillside
Housing
Overlay.
pods.
Pink areas are pods.
That's their pods, but I'm saying, are they proposing not editing anything in that area? Not adjusting the contours in any way, shape, or form?
You'll have to.
So,
When was the overlay put in?
Hillside Overlay, I think we found it was like 2011, 2010, somewhere in that area. It was in response to Staker, when Staker came in.
I would say, my recollection is the purpose was to try to slow Staker down or stop them, and then be able to qualify for the federal funds for the buffer, not necessarily to preserve. And, I mean, if you own that property, how does the city come in and tell you, we're gonna preserve that bare hillside, right? So when you say the purpose is to preserve it, I don't think that's the purpose at all. It's what makes sense there, and how do you straddle that line of property rights and what works best for the city? To me, the questions are more the second one. If we allow development up there at all, how do you pay for it? And it has to be a special service district that pays for it. If not, to me, that's a non-starter. I've told them that for however long they've been bringing it in.
have you guys talked to Draper about their special service district? I mean, I
They-
know,
They started the discussion.
I was gonna say, I know that was a huge
Their issue, my
issue.
my understanding
for
was
them.
that they did not put it in place from the beginning. They tried to do it after the fact. Go ahead.
Some of it.
If I might, I did talk to their city manager today. They set it up with the developer, but they've had a couple different issues. They did create a board after the fact. It was the council before. But they've had their budget referred several times. And then that group, the people up there who were not the ones who lived there originally, have voted to do that. So they've received no funds certain years. but then still have the demands for the extra. So he said in theory, it works great, but as soon as there are new people in there and they feel like I'm already paying a tax to the city, why am I paying extra? My understanding is at one point they wanted them to try and maybe incorporate on their own, do something else. So it's something, it's not the silver bullet solution, because once it's formed and you have property owners up there, they get to control, and they may say, we're not going to pay you this fee. And then what do you do as a city?
To me, that's the biggest issue of developing anything up there.
Yeah, to me too. I don't have, and I understand the concern about the minimizing the impacts, because I agree with that. But when we've been in meetings, it's like, if you have, a lot as big as this room, and right where Alan's sitting, there is a peak right there or something, I'm okay with them just leveling that out, so it's uniform and conformity. And that, I think, that's the letter of the law versus, the intent of the law.
I agree with that.
I'm completely okay with that kind of stuff, because it makes a nicer looking development if has some conformity and things like that. So, and the 30% thing kind of trumps, has a problem with that. So I'm okay with those kind of things, because I don't think it impacts it. I think it's in harmony with what trying to minimize the impacts.
What was the for the people that have been here longer than us, what was the metric of the overlay zone going through property we didn't own? Or is it to put a little inconvenience on Staker, or to slow them down, or to have them ask for more permission? But we took a whole swath of that land of proposed annexation land, I'm assuming, right? Or it was already in the city?
Maybe a little more broad. I know there was a proposed development on the top of the hill, Hillside Overlay, that time. There's a scar up the side of the mountain that was put in. I think it was all in response to things that were happening. Harriman was booming. There was a lot of development being proposed up on the hill, and I think people here were, I wasn't here, but I'm guessing that it was like, hey, let's slow this down. Let's get a grasp on this, make sure we don't run into big issues. So there was Deer Island, there was the Staker piece, there was Rosecrest, the Wasatch South Hills. All those MDAs were getting put in place, and I think there was let's see if we can slow things down. Wasatch and Rosecrest were vested before it, though, so they don't have to adhere to the
Overlay.
overlay.
So I remember it a little bit different because I was here as a planning commissioner. And I remember it was more, it wasn't related to Staker as much as it was related to trying to preserve the hillside.
Yeah.
Because that's why it goes up around the cove, otherwise we wouldn't even have talked about it by the cove. It was to try and avoid the concerns along everywhere and trying to talk about more hillside protection. Staker came in later. Staker came in, if everybody remembers, as a shocky precast concrete plant. And then they started to flatten and then turn it into a mining operation, sold it off to Staker Parsons. So
I was here around that time as well, and I think it's fair to look at the purpose and actually take it as that, and not assume these intentions of other individuals, and we're trying to block this, or we're trying to do that. When you look at the purpose, that was why it was written. And I think it's something you need to look at, and it's like when you look at a zone, you have to assume that's what it means, or ordinance, or anything else. And if we start to look at, we put that to block someone, I don't think that's fair.
yeah, if we did that, I know I wouldn't have voted for it if we were just doing it to block a purpose.
Was
I
it the
believe it was
same
a
time
bigger
as
time.
Harriman Hills Initiative, about that same time?
Yes.
And this was kind of because that
It was
was.
kind of related to the two.
That was a large thing through the council at that point,
Yeah,
was to preserve the hills.
yeah.
And that's why I'm actually kind of concerned, ignore the development. We've basically mined away one of the hills in the protection area that we tried to protect.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of more,
And how did that happen?
again, I have no idea. So that'd be one of my concerns. Again, if the hill protection was to do exactly what Councilman said over there, it didn't do it because they flattened it anyway, right? So we need to enforce that somehow. Gets back to my favorite topic of enforcement that everybody loves to talk about. But I get that we need to try and allow for developers to develop. I totally understand that.
but I think back then we made a decision to try and quantify an area that we wanted to protect. And if you notice, we didn't even protect the property we bought. So.
Was it done with a broad stroke or pretty surgical though? That, I mean,
I don't remember the exact discussion, but I don't remember it being in one meeting. I remember it was a very big discussion of talking about trails and trying to preserve open space, but I don't remember the details. And it wasn't, I know it wasn't just an immediate answer. I believe around this time, wasn't there a resolution that went out for everybody in the city to discuss buying
That
or?
was the year I ran for office
Yeah.
and it failed.
Yeah, I know it
Yeah.
failed, but I know that this passed before that happened.
So if you try to preserve it, how does it change what's being proposed?
Nothing goes
It
up to
really limits the,
They could still put the blue road in, but no pods along that blue road, right?
so.
And
just
then
a
the
quick
majority of the
summary.
housing's on the south side.
Quick summary would be, with the general plan, if you follow the general plan and the Hillside Overlay, you would get 193 total units. If you did the zoning, you'd end up with 146 total units, and what's being proposed is 1,373 total units.
Significant,
10 times.
yes.
Properties, developability.
But the hillside even goes over to Camp Williams and it delineates all of that area as well, so.
Right.
I would assume, again, I can't remember exactly, but I would assume that buffer was to try and create a buffer on a logical hill slope for fighting fires. Again, going back to about that time frame, about 2 years ago?
They had a nice fire.
4 years before that, we had the big Harriman Hills fire, 2012, 11, 12, something like that.
and there was another one in 13 or 14.
Yeah, so.
Yeah, I think there were multiple reasons why this was implemented.
Yeah, it was all going for the buffer, to qualify for the federal funds to try to get the buffer to mitigate the fire. I mean, that's really where it all stemmed from.
Harriman's pretty good at taking advantage of the ACUP funding, correct? Again,
Yeah,
the
they
key
do
word
good
is you
program.
gotta have a willing seller, which by opening it up, you're not gonna have a willing seller, definitely, right? That's true, a fact.
Okay, so that's some good debate on that, I'm sorry, Mayor. But, if we decided to move forward with this, and it would obviously have a great impact on that, so we're all clear on that. So what's the next concerns?
Ridgeline protection views.
Sorry.
That would solve itself if we left the zoning place.
Yeah, I would say concerns from there down for everything on that list, to be honest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The buffer against Camp Williams.
There still
Has-
may be some
has to be
concerns with city
large.
services, because, there is still the road on the bottom looks like it's developable, and they could put housing along that, is that right?
Yeah, there's.
Because that's out of the overlay
We're
zone.
talking the bottom, he's talking about
The road on
east
the,
to west road.
on the,
Red road.
yeah, the red road right here on the bottom, with housing developments along that still could be implemented, because that's south of the overlay zone. And so there's still the city services to consider.
Yeah,
So
if you-
everything along the red road or orange road, that could all be
Most of it.
developed, most all of that could be developed and not be impacted by that?
That's what it looks
By
like.
the Hillside
There'd
Overlay.
be less on the south property line, but yes.
Yeah, yeah.
Based off the map.
The road is entirely outside of the 30% slope.
Yeah,
But there's pieces of the pods that are in.
Right.
yeah, so it would adjust how
It's
that
going to affect
laid
the
out.
number of lots and the size of those lots.
Yeah. And but then, city services definitely is a concern still, that doesn't change.
Oh, huge concern.
Yeah.
So if that's not the silver bullet, then what is?
I don't know, I had that conversation this afternoon, so we'll have to talk and think about it. Again, it sounded like it worked well with the developer, and he said it worked great, they set it up, but then it just, as it went, you had new owners moving in there saying, why am I paying extra for a service? And the road over there, he told me that the maximum slope is 8. So they're even, and their school districts will not, they don't even take buses up there. So a lot of the complaints they get are from parents who have to drive down.
Oh, interesting.
So it's two different school districts, because they straddle the county line.
Yeah.
And so, steep roads are a concern. They are talking about banning large trucks from the one side because they've had an accident recently with a fatality coming off there. So it's just a challenging location.
Yeah, in a previous life, I talked to Draper about that, because of their water concerns when I was designing water lines back up in that
And-
area. And it was a major challenge back then, so I could imagine now.
Yeah, and they do have some challenges with public utilities because it's a single line up. They don't have a loop system. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think the pressures like are 300 PSI between each, I mean, it's extreme challenges.
And even sewer, they've got.
Even the snow plows over there are quite a large expense for the city.
Blake, what about other infrastructure? Like you mentioned that water tank, who funds that?
So that's to be determined. Looking at it, for our impact fee analysis, the way it works is if your development requires a 12-inch pipe, you have to pay for the full 12 inches. But if there's some other thing, other development, or the city has something going on like a trailhead that would require that to go from a 12 to a 14-inch pipe, then we would pay for the upsize. And so tanks would be similar, I believe, Jessica, right? So if you require 1 million gallons for your development, but we need 2 million to service the broader, we'd pay for the extra million.
So one question I have is, going back to if we didn't get rid of the ability, if we kept the 8% slope, what roads work? Do any?
If we capped it at 8%?
If you kept it at 8, what I find confusing is we're like, hey, let's get rid of that, let's get rid of that, let's get rid of that. And so what I'm trying to say is,
The orange one.
what would it just be the orange one, or would even it be
That-
the
that-
orange one?
Yeah,
Well, I don't-
I think the orange one, nothing went above 8%, as I recall.
Is that correct?
They had a table.
Yeah, so the
Did it?
orange one.
Okay.
very small section, this is the one piece that was steep.
between, on the purple road.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the purple, it's the purple.
Okay, it's just
That bus stop was shown like.
right there, okay.
Yeah. The orange one, it never went above 8%.
But you would need to put in that blue or purple road
Access.
either way, just from an access perspective,
Yeah,
correct?
Well,
yeah,
you'd have two access points, and then you could get a loop with your
Yeah.
infrastructure.
Anything over 30 units needs 2.
Well, the fire marshals allowed more than 30 units if you have a collector road. So if you
Yeah.
build at least a 68-foot road that allows the turning radius, they've allowed more than 30 out there. Miller Crossing was one when we started, they were okay with that.
The only caution I would have on that, though, is that it's such an interface area there. I think that would be crazy not to have some sort of a loop. There's no way
Totally agree there.
There's no way you're evacuating people from there. Yeah,
I
it'd be
think,
crazy.
I think if the development goes, it does need the access road.
I
I'm
agree.
not saying that. I'm saying I don't think we should put houses in it.
So that brings up another question, is timing, so this north access road, I don't know which one would go first, but I could see one road being in for a long time and then the other road lagging way behind. So
So that would be concerning to me because of evacuation issues with fire, just because it has that interface.
I think we would need to.
Based on looking at
force
this,
both accesses.
so I assume the green road is not there yet. Is that right?
That's in the middle of the Staker pit.
That's
Yeah.
the hall road right now, I believe, right?
So that would have to be put in, and that's off-site, and then the road that would connect to the purple would have to be put in and is off-site right now? Or is that in?
They have an agreement with.
They do?
with
Okay.
the property owners.
But
So
it's
that
not.
road would be
But it's
able to
not
be
in.
put in probably quicker or easier based on agreements?
It's not in.
Not in from down here either, so there's a pretty good chunk of road there that's
Okay.
a ways out.
I know the Suncrest, because I remember hearing about it in the news, that was one of their bigger issues also, is the second access took forever. So I think tying that to something soon would be a very important thing, some milestone. Preferably
Just
more
simply
than
because
one house.
we have such a history of fires there, and you are right next to the camp, and that's tends to be where they start and they help get those out, but it's.
I was gonna say, I'm with
happens.
Jackson, I've done a lot of hiking around that area, and there's not very tall vegetation, because
Mostly grass.
it's because I believe it's burnt frequently. so.
And I mean, I guess in my mind, because I don't know, and this would be a question to ask, is does something on the south side of this property need to be implemented for further fire safety? That it almost has to be its own buffer for fire safety for that community in between it, because obviously there is that concern of fire hazard.
Like a break.
And I don't have an answer, you'd have to ask fire. I don't know, I don't have any clue.
Bringing that up in our work meetings is, at some point here, we're gonna invite the fire marshal in to have some say on this.
Okay.
Right now, we're still going through some pretty early things, these type of discussions. I
Yeah.
don't wanna bore him to death. but
And I assume at some point we'll have to invite the neighbors in, Camp Williams.
We toured Camp Williams, and they did show, they have 2 fire lines now. They've now built 2 fire lines, because they're very concerned about fire getting outside
My guess is
there.
that's what this road we're seeing.
But that
is
probably is
Probably.
what it is, huh?
That's one of them, yeah.
Yep, that's one.
That's
I
the
did have a
plan.
question. I thought we had in our ordinance somewhere against the camp, a buffer required distance and buffer. If maybe I'm crazy, but I remember talking
I don't
about
remember.
putting an ordinance
I don't know if it was in.
for a buffer somewhere at one
No.
time. And
Not
maybe
that
that
we
was
were
before
aware
we bought the Deer Island discussion. I remember we talked about a buffer back then. And I thought
was
it was a
probably-
big buffer. It was,
There's a study that the county did that has what they would like
yeah.
for that buffer to
And how
be.
big was that buffer? Just
Isn't
so
that
I-
100?
I thought it was huge.
a half mile.
I thought it was a
Half
half.
mile.
I was remember seeing it was big.
When I drew that buffer on here, it basically was a line right here.
I was just
What
curious.
they'd like.
It might have actually been up on this line right
Yeah, it was almost that.
It was a long ways.
They mostly shoot this.
Well, they shoot the 500 guns there. We
Yep.
went and toured and we saw the 105s and 155s or something. And they're massive guns, those howitzers are. So as you're shooting the 500 series there, it'll rattle windows, it'll knock books off shelves, pictures off walls. It's pretty intense.
Yes,
Yeah.
I know when they're firing them,
Yeah.
and I don't live that
And they
close.
said if there's cloud cover, you can hear it downtown. That's how
Well,
concussive it is.
Yeah, you
I know
can.
that
At my
they
house,
have,
you cannot.
they've had to do,
What's happening?
they've had to fix people's homes before with different weapons. And so that was one question I was gonna have
There's that concern.
is that a concern? I know it's not their property, but it is still a reality of moving into that
We
area.
would limit their exercises
So-
if we didn't have that buffer.
So one solution that we've talked about, we're attempting to get the noise contours from the base, is you can do either a noise overlay zone, so people know what they're getting into, and part of that is a real estate disclosure. So if they're buying there, they know they're buying next to, you use them with airports, air bases,
Yes.
Army. If you buy here, understand you're going to hear this activity, and just
We're
so
gonna need to have
it's-
it on the plat, on every paperwork that those people
yeah,
buy,
pretty much every time they
right?
sign it, they have to know that's gonna happen.
It's almost gonna be like a FEMA floodplain kind of concept
Almost.
for the sound.
I said, I've used it with air bases before, and it works pretty well.
Yeah.
It doesn't stop the complaints, but at least it's more apparent to them. It's not like when they said, I bought this property and I didn't realize there was a rail line right across, because the real estate agent brought me at the appropriate time when there was no rail activity. We don't want that kind of thing to happen, so as a city, we need to look at it. So we should, if those, we did a joint study with the base, and that was one of the things they did, we should be able to get that and see where the noise typically exists there.
I think that'd be good to overlay on this map and see where that,
They did that J-Luce study several years ago, and they're updating it right now.
And they do have a map in the J-List, if you look it up, and it shows you where those contours are. So we're just waiting to get it for our GIS.
I think that's
Okay, I think
pretty
that,
good direction. Are there any other items that are?
So real quick, just the pink areas that are on that area that are outside of the Hillside Overlay Zone, why were those depicted? Is that just, again, why are those shown now as developable areas? Is that just because
Developer has
done the analysis and it is less, the slope analysis?
Area is
Okay,
less than 30.
all right, I just want to make sure I was clear on that. Thank you.
Mainly, this one's a big one that.
Yeah.
There's a lot of flat area up in there.
Yeah.
Goes along the back and top slopes.
Okay.
you got some direction then, Blake, you guys?
One other on the design guidelines, why an 8-foot trail? I always like a 10-foot trail. I've never seen an 8-foot trail before.
And in our discussions yesterday, that was up for discussion.
Okay.
We could change it.
Personally, I like 10 feet, but
I know when
yeah.
we've done 8-foot trails in the past, we've had a hard time finding a paver
right?
Do an 8-footer,
Exactly.
That's interesting.
because they want to do 10 or 12, like a lane width.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah. 8 foot's too narrow.
Okay.
Okay.
About that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Blake. Okay, let's move on to item 2.3, discussion of a commercial development proposal on 20 acres located
Oh,
at
yeah, for sure.
15101 South Mountain View Corridor. Michael.
Sure. Look, my best is financially, I just can't absorb it.
Thank you very much. New council, new meeting format. This is kind of fun. However, this is on property with one of our development partners, so not new to us, but a good experienced partner within our community, Kim Rilnesbacher. This grew out of a meeting. Whoops. Oh, this is the microphone. Where is our pointer? Right here. This grew out of a meeting with staff and a new potential development partner in the city. And after we had this meeting, we thought we should bring this to this joint meeting to try and get some direction from this group to inform potential development on this property. This is a property that I'm sure we are all very familiar with. This is essentially west from Redemption, along Mountain View, about 151st South, and the intersection of Academy. It's about 20 plus acres of property, currently vacant. You can see it's zone C2. In your packet, I included a full set of materials that were provided by this new development partner, Taylor Ogden, who is here tonight to be able to answer some of your questions. And as you can see, the property owner, Kim, is here as well. So we're looking at a potential mix of uses that is not fitting neatly within the current C2 zone. And looking at possibility of maybe a rezone of M1 or maybe a planned development overlay. We're just going to be talking about what this looks like. And it's introducing what we're seeing happening around us, these hobby caves, these light industrial buildings that really are very attractive for flex space, for a variety of uses. But they're also looking at a large youth sports complex training facility, as well as some medical facilities. So they had essentially two design options that were shown in your packet, Design 1 and Design 2. And the only real difference was that Design 2 included a hotel pad, possibly. So you can see the breakdown of uses that are envisioned on this property, the type of architecture that this group believes that they can accomplish in this marketplace. And we really encourage them to provide a variety of sizes of spaces. We know that we can attract larger flex spaces, but we have a real need for smaller shared spaces or even incubator spaces. And so you see that reflected in the site plan, that they're trying to generate a number or a wide variety of land uses. They're also talking about this concept of that is a mixture of pickleball courts and some kind of a restaurant, which is being done in some other states. Just some images that were in your packet again. Oh, chicken and a pickle. Right? Got that right? Yeah.
Wendy, you love pickleball.
I love
Yeah.
That's hilarious.
So again, here's that Design 1 possible site layout. And then the second site is just introducing a hotel. Now, since this packet was put together, this group has learned that there are some other sites that are attracting interest from hotel users. And they're very concerned that if that were to play out, then a hotel on this site might not be suitable. So their definite preference is site 1 without the hotel pad. Plus, they indicated in their packet that they would hope that the city would have some leverage or some ways of incentivizing a hotel to come to the city. And Tammy, I kind of spoke on your behalf. I said, other than maybe streamlining a process or doing some things administratively, I didn't really know what we really had as far as incentives for our partners. But doesn't seem like, yeah, we'd love a hotel site, and we think we're ready for it. We're more than ready for hotels in this city. But here's the real key issues is, as everyone knows, the C2 zone comes with some entanglements. It has this requirement for 40% brick or stone. And we're going to talk about this on the next agenda item, but we're always getting some pushback from our development partners. And it seems like through either MDAs or other methods, if it's large enough, the developer can approach the city council and get a waiver from that. But it seems like we're often looking for ways to do a deal, a commercial deal, and modify that standard. And so that's been a challenge again for this group. The other big challenge in our C2 zone is that we specifically have said that our uses cannot include wholesale. At least not as a primary use. Maybe as a secondary use we can do that if you have a front end that's doing retail and wholesale out the back, but the majority of that business model should be retail or other services or uses that are allowed by the zone. But in the C2 zone, we're currently discouraging wholesale. So if you're doing flex space in the C2 zone, that means you can't rent or lease that space out or sell it to a wholesaler or a distributor. And that's really unattractive. And so in talking with this development partner, they're more interested in a potential M1 rezone, but the general plan in this area is not encouraging that. So that's the big question is, do we look at maybe making some modifications to the C2 zone to help this potential project fit in the city? Or are we interested in like a rezone to an M1?
Is it a portion of the development they want M1, or is it the full development they want M1?
No, just high-level concept. We've been talking about the whole site being M1, but you're right. That is another option, is doing some parts of it at C2 and other parts M1. That certainly is a possibility. And neither zoning tool is perfect. For example, in the M1, oddly enough, you can do medical research, you can have a medical lab, but technically you don't have a medical professional service. You have professional office, but not medical service. But that's something that we're going to be working on. As we've had a previous project kind of stall with the city council on creating the M2 zone, we're going to be bringing that back and talking about cleaning up the M1 zone uses and creating a new M2 zone in the city. So that's kind of the big question is, do we want to introduce wholesale activity on this property? Or do we want to hold that line of saying everything should be retail or other professional services that are currently allowed in the C2 zone? And are we interested or willing in changing our masonry standard on building product in this center or at this location?
I think the answer to all those questions is it depends.
Depends.
Bring something specific for us to look at.
Yeah.
If you're asking a blanket answer to change it to M1,
Yeah.
absolutely not.
And they know that this is just a really high-level conversation. One of the things we talked about is having them provide some type of report that would show tax revenues that could be generated by these different uses compared to traditional retail.
That's the thing in that
Yeah.
area is specifically, I mean, we've talked about this a lot lately. These are my words. We've given away every commercially viable area. Mountain View, that area, and one other is all that's left for us to try to establish some sort of tax base. So, as always, at least for me, I'll say we're open to ideas and symbiotic uses, but to just say, yeah, turn it into, I mean, and I love sports, right? But that's not a tax generating activity there, right? That's why we did all the things we did for RSL, to then bring in the commercial stuff that works in concert with that. So, I mean, open to ideas, but to just say, here's design 1, design 2, which one do you like? Neither of them. Like, we need more detail and let's see a real plan.
Because the sports complex could bring tax revenue in that if it brings people to eat at the restaurants that are
Just say if
surrounding
there's
it or
enough
something like that.
symbiotic uses, right?
Yeah,
That makes sense.
yeah. Because I like that idea. I like the chicken and a pickle.
And I think Design One had some of those retail aspects, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes. Yeah, if you look at the images that they're showing.
And I'm not opposed to any of those images, the tilt-ups or the metal steel buildings, but with the finishes such as a dealership, full glass fronts, you know, more glass equals less brick and stone, right? Plus it's more inviting, but if it's all uniform in that retail market space, like this, even the CMU buildings for Starbucks and whatnot there, I think those are great designs. And that's all C2 use, isn't it?
Yes, yeah, and that's why we mentioned, or I mentioned that we could do a plan development overlay, which would work with the C2 zone, and then the council, because that would come to the council for approval, could modify those standards based on specific proposal, right?
I like that.
Are you guys, this is a speculative question, are we behind the 8 ball in the hotel possibly, or they're going other sites, or?
The word from the lead broker on Wasatch's development, this is broker to broker, so I don't know exactly, but he said that they have plans for a hotel on that project. Just
No LIT though yet, or?
I don't know, he acted secure in that statement, but yeah, he definitely didn't give me like backup on it.
We'll gladly take more than one.
Yeah, we will take multiple. No motel.
Hotels are great for us. That's a great use.
You find there's a demand for it, I guess, for more than one in Harriman?
There is. I mean, you could throw 5 more restaurants right by it too. I mean, if you try to go to the Garage Grill right now, and it looked like you had maybe had a concept of another Garage Grill there, like with the cars inside and stuff. So if you
That's storage. No, that's storage.
Yeah,
no, that's
the
storage. Go to the there's one slide back, I believe.
Body case.
Yeah, it's like a picture of like one of the.
That's a hobby
Or a
shop.
lobby shop. Hobby shop. Okay.
Huh.
Somebody's
And is it
personal
similar to
garage.
like the hobby caves down off
Similar.
Bangerter?
Yeah.
27th.
Probably.
No, I mean, that's not the design we'd
Yeah.
like to embrace. And that's just one of the kind of pictures. We think more incubator, get them out of their backyard,
Startup
ADU,
stuff. Okay.
yeah. Some guy might have his collection that he might open to the public, like that picture, but more the top picture, you know, a place that's not your steel industrial flex space that's too expensive for most entrepreneurs or startups.
But some WeWork
More like
space.
the salt mine type,
Yeah, yeah.
salt mine versus
Yeah.
WeWorks.
Yeah, the other thing about a hotel is that Mountain View opening up and connecting and everything right there, it's access to not just our community, but Utah County right there
We
too.
got 2 professional teams right there.
Yeah, exactly.
The base is constantly telling us they
They
don't
need
have
stuff
enough
for the
space.
base,
hotel
yeah.
too.
There's a,
The connection that's coming is gonna bring a lot of.
yeah, yeah.
And it will be a freeway.
Yeah,
Sooner than
But
later.
it's gonna be sooner than later.
Sooner than
It's
later.
funded, right?
It's funded.
yeah.
The next 5 years.
Anyway, just consideration on that anyway. And we've heard for a long time on the Wasatch property that was anticipated to go there, but I know, you might not put a huge hotel there, but there are a lot of the smaller ones that would probably fit really well there.
And Michael, but going back to, I guess, their question, everything else with where this falls, M1, C2, at least with what I've seen as well, I think Teddy just voiced it. I don't see a lot of concerns with the actual architecture, the designs, what they're looking at, what they're thinking. Now, the question is the best route to go with is just PUD overlay, or, because I think the better question is what's the easiest route for them to get to what they've shown us?
The PUD overlay, I think, is a better solution in some ways. The problem with that is it doesn't currently allow wholesale activity. And if you're doing flex space, you really want to have that ability to lease.
So we'd have to have some of it be M1.
A distributor.
What's the stuff on Port Rockwell? Is that M1 for
No,
wholesale stuff?
yes, yeah. And that's the other product that Kim has.
Yeah, and that's a great product. You need more of that tomorrow.
Yeah.
So just hurry.
Yesterday.
The other part there too, they had more, so.
Yeah, 146 is getting done with all their stuff too. It's beautiful over there.
And that's such a great location. Once Mount View finishes going through there.
It's a great location.
And it'll get better. That's the best part.
Even this location is not horrible for an M1 or some sorts of wholesale, but access and traffic and it may be a little more congested in this space in this part, but
The only concern I have at all with having it all changed to M1 is the long term. I would prefer to have part of it M1
Yeah.
and
I'd
C2.
love to jump in there just a second, because maybe as a,
Is your mic on?
yeah, got a mic for a second. So one of the things that I've seen is our firm has designed and built some facilities like this 40,000 square foot one. It was a volleyball, it wasn't pickleball. And it did okay for the first couple of years, and by I think about year 3, they ended up going under, lost their mortgage, and it's now an office building. It got converted. And so if we were to make it an M1, what does it convert into?
The large facility, I should just mention, is not the pickleball facility. The cluster to the
Right.
right of that is the chicken and pickle type
Right,
concept.
but it's kind of that same idea though.
Yeah,
If you know, if it doesn't work, what does it turn into?
Yeah, I mean, frankly, that is a risk mitigant you consider too, is how do we build that building in a way where if youth sports are someday not as viable, especially with the medical office that complements it in the front half of that building, you know, what can a big boxy space be used for? And if you build it too, you know, it's a big steel structure, you're limited.
Did you say pickleball was youth sports?
No. Makes us all feel young, right?
That's why the medical facility's right next to it.
no, but that's a great concept, figuring out what the second and third use is, right? And I don't think you can fix that with just a simple zoning tool. So having a PUD is probably the smart way to go, where there's more uses.
But I do understand if we have to have some of it be M1.
I think that might be a possibility that we should discuss.
I was just gonna mention, I think the group would be open to, like, happy about that, if there was a portion of it, maybe if it's like the, you know, more like southwestern portion that's not as visible from Academy Parkway and Mountain View corridor, it's kind of like in that, maybe if part of that was zoned, you know, so that it allowed for some of the flex space to be a little bit more successful in that area. I think the rest of the product probably will fall under the C2 zone pretty well, so.
It's shaped very similarly to kind of the Harmon's Traverse Mountain development, where you know, one thing we want to avoid in the uses is unnecessary congestion. Depending on the uses, you have a need for docks, access for larger vehicles and things. And so some of the uses complement each other in that regard as well, because you're limited without, I mean, obviously this doesn't show a back entrance where there is a stub right now, but you can relieve some of that with that access, but at the same time, you know, if everything is straight commercial or straight wholesale, you're really creating a problem.
Think they like chicken and a pickle?
They better have good pickles.
As I understand, at this point in time, the property is not under contract, but thank you, Kim, for being here. And we're just looking at some ideas and trying to get a sense of direction where this body is leaning towards. So I think we've got some good feedback.
And Michael, I think we can loop back with even Sandra and Tammy too. I think
Yes.
there might even be another hotel option already looking elsewhere in the city too, to where we already might have our two, to where this could be, that layout right there might be really good.
Yeah,
So-
one thing that was mentioned to me was that a hotel site does use quite a bit of this project area. So that was not there preference, but they heard that we were interested in hotel site, and so that's why they modeled that a little bit.
That's probably one of the best things for us for taxes.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
This property here, is it the rest of that to the south of Academy as well, where the Compass is? Is that part of their development as well?
It's owned by Ken, but not by.
It's not part of that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And I know he's actively working because we're getting calls on that property.
That's a potential hotel site as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
The concern we have is it's hard to compete with what Wasatch has down below because the off-ramp will be there when Mountain View is completed 100%. And we've lost a couple deals on this because the off-ramp was going to be further down.
You're on frontage,
Yeah, yeah. So that's the only concern we have. Property taxes aren't cheap in Harriman, honestly, and it's hard to sit on ground that we can't do anything with. Right? So the flex space has been a great product. We've got another 24 acres we're getting rezoned here soon, right? Just on the
phase
east
two.
side. On the east side, yeah. And you know, that stuff is. We getting calls all every day, and we don't have any space to lease out there anymore, right? So it's a good market for that, and it may get overbuilt here eventually, but that's a great location for flex space with the Puerto Rocco punching through the I-15 now, and it just makes sense that that's a great spot for it. But anyway, we like this piece too, so we like working with Harriman, so we'll try to accommodate as best we can.
Okay, well, thank you. Appreciate you guys being here, and
Thank you, guys.
look forward to this project.
Can you get rid of those extra lunches over there? I haven't had dinner either.
Yeah, you need
Grab
grab
one, please grab one.
No, you should grab
Please
one.
help yourself, don't go to waste, yeah.
Just be careful, some of those, just have lettuce wraps.
Okay, moving on to our last item, item 2.4, discussion and prioritization of pending Title 10 Land Development Code amendments.
In your packet, I included a list of legislative items that we are currently processing, most of which are initiated by our private development partners and property owners in the city. What I really wanted to focus on, and here's the summary. Now, one comment on the auto mall, since I published this, or around the same time that we were publishing this, the auto mall group did remove their request for general plan and zoning amendment from our active list of legislative requests for the Crescent piece. So I'm not sure if that auto mall MDA is going to just focus commercial. It did have another request that was denied by the Planning Commission, or rezone request. So if that was residential, but so that's probably now just pure commercial if that continues to move forward. And then Teton Commercial is up on 118th by Harriman High. That's just underway. I don't even think they've submitted a formal application yet, right, Clint? Yeah, no MDA application on the Teton Commercial.
Yeah, we just had it on the corner side, we had a pre-application meeting.
Right, yeah. So, we have MDAs aplenty that we're working on. All right, so I want to talk about a few potential amendments that we have been thinking about or discussing internally, and then also looking to see what is on the council and the commission's minds for things that you want us to research, or things that you're concerned about as far as tuning up our ordinances in the city for development. One of the things that struck me last year when the Utah State Legislature really removed our ability to regulate single-family homes as far as architecture, appearance, materials. However, if a development partner enters into some type of a negotiated agreement, like an MDA or a planned development, we can reintroduce the opportunity of regulating design and materials. Currently, our planned development overlay requires a minimum of 15 acres. Yes, we still are seeing some larger properties come in and do some type of development agreement or large area master plan. But we're also seeing a lot of these smaller subdivisions, some infill subdivisions, 5, 10 acres. If we were willing to lower our planned development minimum acreage size to something smaller, we could potentially engage on some of these smaller projects and introduce a design standard.
Are there any other benefits to that you're looking at besides the design standard? Because to me, for single family, that's not enough to deal with the bad things that come with it.
And that's why we picked 15, I remember that discussion, is to try and not
You know, I don't want
entice all the other
negative
stuff.
things that come with it, and if, I mean, we can't regulate how much brick is on it, it's a single family home. Those smaller infill lots are the only things where we're gonna see single family homes.
And that is completely fair. I think that's a good comment. That was one comment that I had on this plan development. The other is, plan developments can be applied to other things other than residential.
Well, are there any other benefits?
No, I think just overall design, just site design and architectural design. So if we feel comfortable just saying we're not gonna regulate design on single-family homes, let the marketplace dictate, I think that's fair.
I think we should say that.
Yeah, but if I'm a property owner, why would I want to do that? Because we're gonna have to give something to get that.
Yes, that
You know,
is
we're
true.
gonna have to give a lot. If we're gonna say, here's your design standards, and they don't have to comply to those, what are we gonna have to give to get
Typically,
those?
in the plan development for a project like that, you're
Density.
saying, okay, you can build 20 units, now through a PUD, you can build 21 or 22.
Exactly.
Yes,
You're right,
railroads
you're right.
and all
Yeah.
That's why we actually tied it to 15 acres, honestly.
Yeah, I just think that
Remember
we'd
that
have to give
discussion?
too much for what we would get.
Yeah, but I get your intention on the
Yeah.
landscape or the design.
Also, if we were to apply a plan development to a commercial property, our plan development currently requires 20% open space. Now, that is one thing that you'd get with a plan development, is open space. Clearly, in a commercial center, though, you wouldn't want to have 20% of that be open space.
Yeah.
It's kind of
So,
counter to what we.
I
want
was
for commercial.
curious, could we talk about amending the plan development when it's applied for commercial centers to not have that high of an open space requirement, or maybe eliminate it altogether for commercial projects?
I say yes.
Yeah,
That might be
Yeah.
something.
I think walkability is more important than open
Yeah.
space.
And we, that's
So
one of
we-
the other
we do
topics.
need a-
But I think a
Walkability of
minimum
commercial
landscaping
spaces.
may still be.
Yeah, I think
We have a couple.
overall
We still have
landscaping,
landscaping
we don't care if we.
Yes. Yeah, it's just the raw open space dedication that is currently required in the plan development tool.
Yeah, bullfrog, I remember that being a weird
I would be good though if you eliminated it, but then just put in the requirements, a walkability layout for all of the commercial, because we've had quite a few problems with that, with our commercial developments, that they're really not walkable.
Okay, as I mentioned earlier, we always have our development partners pushing back on brick or stone. And it seems culturally, we're concerned about losing deals. We're worried about losing commercial projects over our brick and stone standard. And it seems like we're often looking for ways around it. And sometimes we get there, maybe more often than not. Is it time to really revisit that standard? Or do we want to recommit to it? Because it doesn't seem like we are. It seems like we're often modifying that standard. And I'm wanting to know, where are we right now? What's the pulse of
Correct me if I'm wrong,
this
but
body?
the time that was kind of put in was during a time where everything was just that terrible Cephas stuff, right? Like, and just endless rows of blank stucco/concrete walls, and they were trying to keep a certain aesthetic. They wanted the town center red brick sort of thing. I don't know that.
I don't think that was the intent. I honestly think the issue was you were getting I'm painting brick veneer and stuff like that. I think that was more the intent to try and capture it, if I remember right. I don't.
What?
When you had like the KFC getting by with the pre-painted
CMU wall.
The CMU. Basically they bolted up paneling and then painted it. Right. That was more the intention, is to actually make it look more architectural.
Some quality, because I think that's
Quality is, I think, the intention. I don't think it was to avoid anything else other than
There's a lot of things
make it look like a standard. You know, like Park City has its standard look.
Right.
And I think the intention was to try and create Harriman as a, I know we want commercial, I get it, but we can't just say, oh, I'm willing to give up everything for commercial.
We already have. I mean, like I said, given everything away, and to Michael's point, I mean, tell me where we've stuck to that with any commercial building.
Well, and where we're looking right now,
Right?
where we're looking right now, and this is one reason why I said in the development review, I think we should remove, when we did the whole Wasatch property, we basically gave up every right we had for controlling anything. So Lee's Marketplace, we other than saying, yes, put it there or move it 5 feet, we had no option. I mean, I remember when the old city attorney said we couldn't even act on anything, and we had that big debate. So I think the development agreements were the problem with those, more so than our standard. And the same thing happened with Anthem, the development agreement, and that's where we talked about walkability. And if you go look at the Winco, yes, there's the nice big yellow sidewalk painted thing up to it, but it doesn't really, it wasn't the intention we were going after from a flow perspective.
No, and I apologize, I'm not suggesting that we give up all design standards for commercial projects.
I didn't think you would.
Yeah, just the brick or stone is the piece that we often get pushback on.
Well, that's kinda
And I
what-
did, and I don't know our resident architect here, it is a cost, right? There is a real cost to doing brick on.
There is a
commercial
cost.
buildings. Yeah, over other materials.
There's probably a premium of about $10, $15 a square foot to go up to the
But
stone, but
I don't, I mean, Jackson, I don't know. I look at it as you look out the back door of the city building or look towards the city building, it's going to maintain this look for a lot longer. And it looks nice.
Yeah.
And so I guess the question is, what standard are we trying to establish?
But that's not commercial, it's all res.
Well, we're gonna have 2 commercial lots right there too, and it's like, are we gonna fold and have it not look conducive and have stucco on it, or what? Is that what we're, because if we eliminate this, they can come in and say, it doesn't have to look like any of this now.
I mean, look at the, I mean, I know it's residential, but look at the fight we had with the edge stuff right around town hall.
Yeah.
It turned out awesome,
Awesome.
and they charged more for it and it sold instantly.
They didn't,
So,
they didn't wanna
I'm
do
just
any of
saying-
those brick buildings.
I
It didn't
get
cost them anything.
And that's what I'm gonna say, is I actually am comfortable with what we have. I do think we need to quit bending with our development agreements and watching for those little clauses, which I know we've all been reviewing those more than we ever have before. But, I personally think we need to play the long game and try and make sure we're getting what we want. I kind of think that what Jackson was saying is the good quality might make sure that that developer really knows what they're going to put in that, and it's going to be a business that's going to be sound versus something that is a pie in the sky idea that might.
Well, that's kind of where it's going with the quality thing, right? To me, that's what it's more about is a quality product, so we don't end up with something that is just a box with the skin on it that looks terrible in a few years, which happens in a lot of places. With a larger development like Wasatch, I mean, whether it's this council or other councils, every single one is going to do the same thing and do a development agreement and let them do something outside of that. But having that standard, that's the starting point for the conversation, not the bottom.
Exactly.
Right? And to me, that it
agree.
accomplishes what we want it to do.
I agree.
Even if we end up with something different, that is, in my opinion, that's a good design. It's for the entire area. It's a large project. But when you have, say, Maverick off of Main Street in 126, what did they do? They just said, okay, we want it right there. We're going to build it there. Not a big deal. We'll do the whole thing.
The same with all the banks. I mean,
Right,
we've
they'll all-
gotten out of our credit union phase.
For those types of things, they'll all conform because it makes sense too. It's the bigger ones where they're gonna want something different, and then you can negotiate that, but we have to start from that higher position.
Theirs, right? I'm okay if it's a theme to that area.
Right.
Where we
to a
give it
larger
up.
development.
Because it's a larger development, it looks that way. I mean, even the Anthem.
But
we were
having
talking
this
about that.
prevents the one-off, everybody wanting a different.
And it lowers the baseline.
Yeah, and I agree. I mean, I think you need to have a starting point baseline. But if we're losing businesses, a lot of these businesses that are looking at this in detail are those ones that have their prepackaged, already designed centers, already are usually this much or better in design, where they have more glass or they have a better look.
You'd have to show me like actual examples of who we're losing.
Well, this also, I don't know.
It's easy to say we've got a call from somebody and, well, they
I mean,
didn't.
like a boss said, what we did with, right?
I remember with what you're saying though, is I thought the glass actually offsets. So if they went.
It
with
does.
more
And it probably
glass-
does, and
I'm just saying
there's a
that-
percentage,
Yeah,
yeah.
I think where we really get into is the CMU paint.
Yeah,
And that we don't.
and then I'm
wanna see.
okay with that,
Right? I mean,
Correct.
so I think, I actually think we're doing
Because
well.
I personally don't care about the brick or stone. I think in my mind it's more about quality. there are products out there, they develop new products all the time that are good quality, that are just as long lasting as stone, some of the stone they put up. But to me, it's just more about quality than it is about saying this much percentage of brick or stone.
But they can go,
If the developer can prove that this
Yeah.
product is equal
Yeah.
or like the stone, veneer, brick, whatever.
Right.
I guess just as long as that's clear, because sometimes if you read through something and you hit that, you're
It's
like,
black and white, and you're like,
I
nope.
can't.
Back when we could enforce the residential standard, we
We
would
had
see-
exceptions.
We would see
We had exceptions
But-
based
You
on
saw
product.
better quality
Yeah.
windows, and you saw reason, and those made sense, and we even approved those.
I
But
think
if
the hard thing is people don't
Because they could prove it was
necessarily see that.
equal or better quality when they came
But
in.
if the next Maverick comes in, and they wanna really upscale their design, even in a different way, right? I know we would entertain that discussion, because we
Yeah.
did it on the residential side. It wouldn't be just an immediate no, it would be show us what you're going to do
Yeah.
that's better than the
Yeah.
40% stone. So if
I
that's
think
more
that just
windows.
So
to
that
be
message
clear.
needs to get out there, because obviously, it sounds like it's not, but we did that with Vasa, right? I mean, they came in with more windows and things like that, yeah, great.
I think as long as it's clear, I think people just don't wanna have to go through a huge process of coming to planning commission and paying their money and going, I wonder if they're ever gonna approve this.
But a lot of the times, it's not the actual person reading, it's their help or the people, the associates in the office that are reading these reviews and
Sorry,
coming
can't
back
build
to
there.
ordinances and saying, nope, they don't allow this or this or this, and they're getting the whole synopsis.
Yeah.
Well, and I think I honestly think once Mountain View opens completely, Harriman, the commercial will change. You'll see a driver there more than it ever
But
has.
we're taking 20 years though, right? I
No.
don't think we've seen Mountain View.
No,
No,
it's funded. In the next 5 years, you're gonna
Mountain View's funded and
see.
they're starting design construction.
But not
in 2
for
years.
the freeway.
No, the freeway,
The freeway.
the freeway.
But, anyway,
But I think our commercial needs to be built out prior,
yeah.
especially along Mountain View. We need to
Well,
have this,
and
we have
that's
this
fine.
designated.
But I think with the knowledge of that happening, that's gonna help drive the commercial.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What most of these companies do, just like the Maverick, they have their, like I said, their set designs and styles, whatever. And if that's the location that makes the most sense, like they
They're gonna
have
do it anyways,
plan
yeah.
A, B, C, D,
Yeah.
okay, well, if that's not what fits there, then we'll move to the next one and do that.
They wanna be in the area, so they will adjust.
They want to be here, they'll adjust, they'll make it work.
So I think we're saying, stay.
We're recommitting. We are recommitting.
On the residential
Reference.
side,
And Chase and others who've been talking already with John Gass about Teton, the reason why they want to do an MDA is because they want to have some flexibility, including reducing their brick or stone. This is the same group that's done Anthem Commercial.
Yeah.
Just so you'll know, I mean,
Their
so that's why
flexibility is
they're doing
our
this, because they want to get around that standard, right? So that,
Well, glass is an option.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and we don't, any opening, like for glass, is already discounted. It's 40% of what's left after the glass is deducted, so.
It really just avoids the Smith look. I mean, it's a great
Yeah.
business, but
Okay.
it avoids that.
All right.
That's all we're trying to do.
And all of these, well, I shouldn't say all of them. I'm gonna say a lot of these are ones that we haven't initiated yet formally. These are things that we've been thinking about. This next group, we do need to do some administrative amendments to our ordinance. Code enforcement, as you know, has been shifted over into the police department. So there are some elements that are currently in Title 10 that I think we're looking at consolidating into Title 3, is it? One. Yeah, for administrating our code enforcement. Business licensing is now under Tammy's purview, whereas previously it was under the authority of Blake as the Community Development Director. And then we are always dealing with zoning interpretations and trying to clarify the intent of our ordinances. And as you know, we just completed another Utah State legislative session. We're going to be reviewing our code against the updates. In fact, I'm going to a training session tomorrow with the league on that. So we'll be generating some updates that are required by the state here soon. Planning Commission is going to be having a public hearing on changing the names of our agricultural and residential zones to make them more consistent. This is something we've been working with some members of the City Council already on. But we also are looking at the 8.25 zone, and we talked about potentially changing the density standard, the bonus standard in that zone. So that's something that we've been working on. I'm assuming that that's still a hot topic, that we still want to address the 8.25 zone in total, right? We were working on it as a staff, and then we kind of moved it on the back burner in favor of some other projects, but okay, we're still going to be working on that then.
But Michael,
Oh, please, go back.
We're redoing that and the renaming anyway, right?
Yes, we're doing the naming, but
So
then we still need to come back and talk about uses within these
Right.
zones, some development standards, including 8.25.
Yeah, it won't be
Yeah.
titled
Yeah.
825
Yeah.
anymore.
So one of the amendments that came out of the legislative session this year is they're really pushing us again on the moderate income housing. There's some additional standards that are required. There's a new reporting process. They're moving the reporting process up early. It is going to be pretty significant for us as a city to respond to. We presently have been submitting our annual reports and doing okay, just relying on what our development partners are already building within the city. All of the attached housing that we have is obviously more affordable than single-family detached. But if you look at the changes in state code, it really starts to push more on, okay, cities, what are we doing? Not what our development partners are doing alone. What adjustments in policy have we made? How are we investing our resources in order to create moderate income housing? This is an image that some of you may be familiar with. This is a workforce housing project that was done up in Summit County. And we've talked about, is there an opportunity or desire here to do something small that would contribute towards moderate income housing? But I do think...
What do they call everything that's in the city? We have the highest density of any city in the state other than downtown Salt Lake City. And how do we control what developers built? It's entitled, they're building it, what more do they want? The density's there, the numbers there, what do they want us to do?
What changes to ADU and stuff like that?
Yes, and that will help as well.
I think they're trying to control the price of homes, which is not
Which is
our
ridiculous.
role, it's theirs, it's the sellers. So, but it's inflated anyway.
Every time the government, all they do is increase the prices. But I mean, do we want to entertain this? We have it coming out of our ears and then some. If talking about the types of housing, we don't even control that anymore. They've taken that away. Olympia, everything's entitled. There's nothing else in this city. There's just not.
So Michael, are you saying that the state is now requiring the cities to come up with potential solutions versus just sort of leaning on the developers as they put in stuff? Is that what you're saying?
For example, we do have a slowly accumulating fund that is being generated from our CDA that is specifically needs to be invested in housing, moderate income housing. And in the new update, it's asking us, what are we doing with that? What are we doing with that fund that we are accumulating?
We're accumulating it so that we can pay the sky high price that the legislators created.
But we'll need to come up with a program or a policy for that, for example.
To me, that has nothing to do with the type of housing or zoning.
But it is part of the moderate income housing report, right?
So I think that's a completely different conversation for the council, or the monetary item of, okay, here's what this money's set aside for. Here's all the different things that we think that we could use it on. I don't think that's necessarily a development issue.
And Michael, I think
So
we
are they
need to try to
looking
get
for,
No, go ahead.
are they looking for specific numbers at different area median income type,
Yeah, and we
looking
have been
50%,
reporting that,
80%,
right?
or?
So there's certain objectives, certain number of objectives that they want each city to work on. They've expanded that list. Right now, we've got to do more objectives than we have in the past. And if we don't, then we don't have priority for infrastructure, transportation funding. So our ability to attract funding from the state
Priority before?
is at risk if we don't.
How's that change?
If we don't do this.
And I think that is the
Comply with
change.
state.
I think that's the change this year is now if we get to 5, we become a priority. It doesn't, we're not just meeting it.
Right.
3 to meet it, right, Tammy? 3 to meet it, 5, and we become a priority for. So I think we almost need a work session
Yes,
topic to
yeah,
look at
yeah.
the bucket list and choose our 5.
And just come out, we can look at it and figure, a lot of them are just policy discussions, they're not really development. We don't build homes as a
Right.
city, really don't think we wanna get in that business.
Right. Yeah, it's just
If we wanted
policy.
that, we should've done it 10 years ago, we'd have been ready.
And that's, I mean, to your point, Jared, I think
We'd have
that's
rich
where,
city.
you know, where a lot of it is built out already. Some of these policies we can put in, and it's probably not gonna have a big effect on the city, because we're entitled out a lot. So, you know, we can put some of these policies in, they may not ever come to play, but we're putting them in place, you know, for.
My wife just reminded me that I come across too gruff. My ire is not with anyone in this room that's the legislature.
No, she's watching.
That creates this stuff.
Oh, man. Not a problem. Okay.
Well, let me throw one
Oh,
other
please.
idea out there. That something I could see coming is I've heard a lot of developers talking lately about building neighborhoods for rent as opposed to just home ownership. And so a lot of those might be smaller homes, you know, and maybe there's, you know,
Yes, and we have
so that might
met
be something I
with,
could see coming.
It's called City Creek Reserve, is that what it's called? Which is an arm of the LDS Church. Obviously, they own Creek Ridge, or, yeah, and so they're looking at bringing that product to our city. They're also working in other areas, St. George. So, yeah, I think we're at Riverton, so we're gonna see, I think, a proposal on that here soon.
Well, if it's already coming, is there a way we can use that to our advantage to get to a 5?
Yes, yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
The only concern, and this is just a broad concern about that, is there is a lot of statistics about home ownership and communities. And so I just think that we have to be really cognizant of that. How much of our product is currently for rent products, and how much more can we assimilate without really changing the dynamics of our community? I'm not suggesting that rental is bad, but there is a lot of stats about you know, just degradation of your communities if that overwhelms you.
Well,
So,
and where, that's a good point, because where a lot of this is going is subsidies.
Yes.
Which compounds the problems that we're talking about exponentially, but that's the direction the legislature wants to push on this.
Yeah,
Yep.
or other government programs, right?
yeah.
How do we know how much is rentable? We have our obvious rentable spaces, but even second, third home ownership is being rented. Like even there's plenty of people that are not even selling their house, they're just moving houses or renting out what they own because the market is, or even basements or AUDs
Sure.
or ADUs.
I'm suggesting that it's probably not a perfect science, but there are certainly a lot of the complexes that we do know.
Yeah.
Or, you know, this is a for rent, and it's developed as a for rent
Correct,
complex,
yeah.
that kind of thing. Just, at least if we had some sort of baseline to know. I just think it's important to keep our finger on that, so we don't it just really changes your community.
For sure.
If
Well,
you-
let's bring that back in a work meeting then and talk about this item then.
Another one that we've been concerned about as staff is as we continue to move more and more of our development requests further up the mountainside, we just need better tools for regulating grade changes and how we develop on grades. We currently don't have a maximum limit. If you can engineer it, you can build it. So if you want to build Devil's Tower and that's your lot and you want to put your house on top, then you can engineer it. I mean, there's just no maximum. So we're suggesting that we probably need to look around and adopt some better tools. We often have seen when one property owner wants to do something that's maybe a little extreme on their property, there's always the downhill side to that, right? The neighbor who has to deal with some of the fallout of those severe grade changes. So that's something that we've been researching, and I think we may have a model that we can share in a future work session that we'd like to share with the city council. Okay, now with all of that said, I don't know if there's anything else that you would like to talk about, any other ideas that you have. I love this image, though, of the town center. Of all of the frustrations and all of the things that we often wish could be better or things that we think has gone wrong in the city, this is a fantastic center.
But there's only 4
We have
kids
done,
there.
but you all have done a fantastic job in building some very special places in the city. This project stands up to anywhere. So sometimes we get it right, and you've done a good job, and our development partners have done a good job. But so, are there any other issues that you are anxious about that we haven't talked about? Things that you're worried about in our code that needs to be better, or if you can't think of anything at this moment, that's okay. But
No,
as you know, the council and the planning commission, each body can initiate a text amendment. So you can always request these amendments, as part of your meetings.
I don't know where we should put it, and I don't know how to fix it, and I know Chase is aware of this, and police, we've talked about this, is in our product that is private lanes, we lose a lot of our ability to do anything. So I know that there's a lot of issues with parking and frustrations there. And I think you're going to have, since that is a lot of our product that we have, we need to do something to help those people that are kind of stuck in this, I pay taxes for the city, but I can't get anybody because I'm in a private lane. There's some, and again, I don't know what ordinance it is, but I know that there's a huge issue with parking, and if you happen to be the people on the board, you're okay, but if you're not, there's a huge issue going on tonight.
Are you speaking from an enforcement perspective?
Correct. Making it so that you could actually do something that makes it safe. The intention was never to allow people to park like they are, and it's blocking the roadway, which is not, even though it's not a public road, the intention was it was going to be like a public road. And I think we need to do something there to help those people. Again, it's bigger than, I don't think any of us would have thought about it.
Again, you're talking about enforcement, not maintenance. And
Totally, it's enforcement of.
Well,
where
there's
people
one
can park.
particular place that was enforced, and then some signs were removed, and then now you can't do anything about it.
Does the state regulate a lot of that in HOAs, don't they, as far as enforcement? type
Enforcement?
stuff? Yeah.
Well, there are multiple factors that go into it. A lot of it's the design, right? We've updated our engineering standards recently, as you're well aware, to require that private road cross-sections comply with our cross-sections. That's largely been a lot of the problem. We've seen that in South Hills area.
do those apply to all these MDAs that were
Not the
grandfathered?
past
And that's the problem, right, is going forward, those apply, but what do we do
Everything's
about
entitled,
places?
it doesn't matter.
And really, it's a property rights issue, is you have a private development that can be viewed as its own individual community inside of a larger community, where we are acknowledging that you guys decide what the rules are, and you guys decide how to enforce them, right?
And the reason I bring it up is every person that I've talked to that lives in South Hills, the roadway parking is the issue, and they call the police force and they can't do anything. And so you're seeing a lot of people just get frustrated for no reason. We need to figure out a way to help that out, is the only thing that I've seen a lot. It seems like everybody I talk to, if they live in South Hills.
Maybe a committee on how to run for an HOA board.
Exactly. And that's what I said.
Here's how you do
I've
it.
said that before, but
Yeah.
it's still, you know how that goes.
Yeah.
I'm on my board, that's one of the reasons why so I can park my trailer in my driveway. Not true, but I'm on the board. It's not a fun task, but yeah.
Okay, well, thank you, Michael. Appreciate everybody being here tonight and your comments and input tonight. Look forward to these joint sessions. Again, the planning commission, thank you for what you do. Future meetings, April 7th, planning commission meeting. April 13th, city council work meeting at 5:30, followed by regular meeting at 7. With that, I'll look for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
Motion by Adam, second by Sherry. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, everyone.
I think we're asking about trouble.